Retired IDF General Nehoshtan, former commander of the Israel Air Force. But before we get into his assessment of geostrategic and technological trends shaping the region's balance of power, let's take a look at his very distinguished career.
Retired IDF Major General Nehoshtan was commander of the Israeli Air Force from May 2008 to May 2012, a period which included a war in Gaza, serious plans for a possible Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, deployment of Israel's Iron Dome, and the signing of an MOU with the United States for procurement of Israel's newest frontline fighter, the F-35. Before that, he was head of planning on the IDF General Staff during the 2006 Lebanon War. In that capacity, he was responsible for the IDF's 5-year modernization plan, forging international cooperation with countries in this region and far beyond, and represented the IDF in negotiations with Washington toward a new 10-year, $30 billion U.S. aid deal. In 1975, Nehoshtan first joined the Israeli Defense Forces, where he served as a fighter pilot. Until 1978, he flew an A-4 Skyhawk and was then retrained for the F-4 Phantom in the 107th Squadron. Throughout his career, Nehoshtan served as an instructor at the pilot school, then as the 253rd Squadron Deputy Commander. Since retirement, Nehoshtan became active in the private sector, serves as chairman of the advisory committee of the Wexner Foundation in Israel, chairman of the Israel-Australia Chamber of Commerce, and a member of the international board of the Weizmann Institute for Science. Nehoshtan, commander, strategic planner, businessman, and emissary to the business and scientific community. Welcome to Strictly Security.
Ido, so good to have you with us.
Pleasure to be back. Hi.
Let's start with the Iranian threat and the potential it has for bringing Israel closer with some of the Arabian Gulf states. Earlier this year, we saw the Israeli Air Force publicly participating with the Emirati Air Force in a multinational drill in Greece. Earlier, they flew together in Nevada with the U.S. blue flag. Do you foresee a time when these type of operations, joint exercises, I should say, become the rule rather than the exception?
Well, I wish, of course. There is underground and above ground politics in the Middle East, you know that. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, it's quite obvious that today the geostrategic map of the Middle East certainly puts Israel and the Sunni countries, Gulf, Saudi Arabia on the one side, mm-hmm. and Iran on the other side. In that respect, we have joint interests and hopefully room for cooperation. Absolutely.
All right. Well, on to the UAE. President Trump has agreed to consider starting a process, a long process that after many years could result in the UAE becoming the first Air Force, the second Air Force behind Israel, of course, to receive the F-35. How would this affect Israel's QME, the qualitative military edge?
Well, you mentioned the notion of qualitative military edge. This is certainly a pillar in our defense philosophy of force design and force buildup. And it comprises of two elements, actually. One is having the best equipment that we can from the United States, our ally, and not having that in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And the second is no less important, the unique capabilities of the Israeli defense industries. And that layer is always unique to us.
Yes.
So it's still early to talk about the F-35 to other countries, I think. But certainly the notion of qualitative military edge is a key to us, to our philosophy here in the Middle East, and we need to maintain it all the time.
Well, let's focus on the F-35. And from what you've been hearing, is this fifth-generation stealth flying supercomputer all that it's cracked up to be? You know, there's many detractors.
Yeah, well, detractors as they might be, of course, this is a new airplane. It's not no secret behind the decision of purchasing and entering the era of the fifth generation in the Israeli Air Force. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think being the first, given your previous question, being the first has a unique strategic advantage here in the neighborhood. Deterrence and also operational capabilities. Certainly, without disturbing the vagueness of the Israeli Air Force approach to the F-35 now. It's on the verge of becoming operational. And having the unique virtues of the F-35, I think that the steps ahead of the Israeli Air Force in their capabilities are still ahead of us. And we will certainly see the benefits of having the first F-35 capabilities in the Middle East. Absolutely.
With unique Israeli systems inside.
With unique Israeli capabilities and the integration to the entire Air Force, not only the F-35. And this is ahead of us, and I'm sure that the know-how will develop, actually it is developing, and how to best utilize this F-35 into the Air Force and into the unique strategic challenges of Israel is still ahead of us. And I'm sure it will be done in a perfect manner.
Well, the F-35 would be instrumental, I would imagine, in any type of action that Israel may need to take in the future vis-a-vis Iran. And we had earlier in this program Ephraim Inbara, conservative expert and analyst, who is urging unilateral Israeli action because the nuclear deal with Iran is so full of holes and so problematic. What do you say to those who are urging this type of action?
Well, I agree that the agreement certainly is full of holes. For the short term, it's, achieving its goals and actually put Iran away from the bomb to some distant. But for the long term, and we are here for the long term, it certainly have holes. Nevertheless, we are now living in the international context of the agreement. It's there. So I didn't see any context, in this context, any attack coming soon. But
But the F-35 will be a key player if and when that...
Absolutely will be a key player, and the Israeli Air Force will be a player. And, Israel have stated time and again that it reserve all its rights to
sovereign rights to self-defense.
Defense itself. And
Ido, I have to ask you, before the JCPOA, this Iranian deal, was signed, when you were commander of the Air Force, how close was Israel actually to carrying out a strike on Iran?
Yeah, well, this is a kind of discrete question, and I'm not sure it's
indiscreet. I shouldn't, but we have to ask.
I'm not sure it's measurable, but certainly in my time, the three major challenges that were put to me in the beginning, the first one was Iran, and so were the second and the third. So definitely Iran was on the table. It was the pre-agreement era.
Yes.
And we saw the danger of Iran becoming, or on the path of becoming nuclear. And having the operational option on the table all the time is, well, eventually lies upon the shoulders of the Air Force.
And you were satisfied with your comfort level with that option being carried out successfully?
One should not sell short the capabilities of the Israeli Air Force.
And on to the capabilities of the Israeli Air Force, we saw earlier this month 8 countries flying together in Israel's Blue Flag exercise. Israel obviously has a lot to offer partners and allies. What are some of the things that Israel shares with these friends?
Well, first of all, this Blue Flag exercise is certainly a statement on the very high level of these countries coming to Israel, some for the first time, sharing a very intimate type of training, and air training is kind of intimate between countries, and that absolutely presents the existence of joint challenges and joint values and joint understandings. On the tactic level, I think that, what you do in such exercise is kind of choose some scenarios and fight together, try to solve this kind of operational scenarios. It's not necessarily what we are engaged specifically in Israel, but again, the importance is the strategic level of having such
cooperation.
Extensive, actually the largest exercise in Israel ever.
We will be back with more from Nehoshtan after this very short break. Stay with us.
I'm Khaled bin David.
And I'm Nareet Ben.
Join us on The Rundown here in the heart of the Middle East for a candid conversation.
A closer look at the stories born out of this region and driving changes all the way to Washington. Every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Drama that only life can offer. Exploring society from within. Packed with untold truths and heart-wrenching dilemmas. The best documentaries, taking you on unforgettable journeys.
Join Lauren Izzo weeknights at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
In the Holy Land, there are wonders most people never get to see. I-24 News will take you inside the shadows and unravel the secrets of some of the world's most revered sites in a way you've never experienced. All access from every angle. Tune in to Sacred Sites 360, Sunday 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
We're back with retired Israel Air Force General Ido Nehoshtan. Ido, during the 2006 Lebanon War, you were J5 head of plans, which essentially was a foreign minister of the IDF. Back then, Lebanon, Hezbollah was not as open about its alliance with Hezbollah, nor was it as firmly ingrained in the institutions of Lebanon as it is today.
Well, it was quite open and quite ingrained. Maybe not as today, but it's quite obvious that
So
Hezbollah
comparatively speaking, now that it's so part of all the institutions in Lebanon, will it be easier for Israel to have international legitimacy to wage decisive war in Lebanon, not only in those 240-some villages in South Lebanon, but throughout the entire country?
Well, we don't seek war in Lebanon, of course. Nevertheless, Hezbollah and Iran attitude and manifest towards Israel is quite clear, and the military capabilities follow. And it's no secret that the existence of thousands and thousands of rockets and missiles in Lebanon are a threat to Israel. So we have to be prepared for that. And if we are challenged, I'm sure that the reaction or our response will be overwhelming. This is the philosophy. We should be overwhelming on Lebanon as a state. We will do whatever it takes to protect our people. And the response will be absolutely overwhelming.
Please, but the next time around about international legitimacy.
Yeah. Well, it's always the case. But once we are challenged, Israeli defense and security comes first. This type of war is kind of the evolution of the world's, of terrorism, if you will. And you can see three elements. The evolution of missiles and rockets. Right now, Hezbollah is probably one of the strongest armies in the world, not only a terrorist organization. Then you have the underground world, and you see the similarities between Lebanon and Gaza, by the way. And the third, and this is where you're going, is the fusion between military and civilian. Actually, all lies within civilian, condensed civilian population.
So how to be effective without harming innocents.
And for that, we have developed throughout the years our capabilities to really pinpoint and target exactly what we want. Nevertheless, they are, for good reason, putting their assets inside and within the civil population to make it hard for us. But we will do whatever it takes to target the right military targets that we find suit. And it will be overwhelming. Mind you, you mentioned 2006. and being decisive, or the critics of being a decisive,
Right.
long and indecisive war. And I think that the rub lies within the term decisive, because it's changed. Why? Because if you judge the success of the campaign, it should be assessed by the quiet period that we have after.
Okay, but so we can expect a 34-day, a 50-day war in future, or?
Well, it's certainly not of our interest to have long campaigns. Nevertheless, we should not develop expectations that the rockets and missiles will cease before the last minute. For that, we came up with the understanding of having the necessity of active defense, like the Iron Dome and David Sling and Arrow, so we can relieve the pressure on the civil population in Israel. Nevertheless, at the same time, we have to conduct the offensive. So eventually, the outcome that will be measured on the day the operation ceased will be successful.
Just as deterrence is measured once the fighting stops.
Absolutely. And you see that we have 11 years of quiet in the Lebanese border, and we have a couple of years of quiet in Gaza as well. And the measurement is not as decisive inside or the campaign or the seizing of the rocketing and launching of missiles, but rather the effect and discernment that they have after.
After the fact. Ido, thank you so much for your insights. It's a pleasure to host you here.